Hello, my name is Bob Smith, 74 years old. This is my true story. I thought the home I constructed with my own hands would always be my sanctuary. I spent years laboring, piece by piece, imagining that in my later years, I would be honored beneath that roof. But instead, my own son treated me like an inconvenience. One summer, while he and his family went on vacation, he confined me in the basement as if I meant nothing. I sat in the shadows, humiliated, starving, furious, but I refused to remain defeated. I took an action that stunned my son. Before I reveal what happened next, please subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I wasn't born into ease. Everything I achieved in life came from relentless effort, toil, and compromise. When I was young, I held down 2, sometimes 3 jobs simultaneously. I spent my mornings in the factory, my evenings doing woodworking, and on weekends I took on minor building projects just to survive. I avoided spending on extravagances. Every salary was meticulously allocated to cover meals, expenses, and reserves. But beyond mere existence, I harbored one aspiration: to construct a family residence with my own hands, a structure that would endure for generations, a spot my children and their offspring could always come back to. That vision sustained me when my body ached and my hands were calloused from work. Piece by piece, I turned that aspiration into reality. I purchased a modest parcel of land after years of saving. It wasn't grand, just a lot on the outskirts of a small American town. But to me, it was priceless. With the remaining funds after acquiring it, I began constructing. Evenings after exhausting shifts, I would mix concrete under the stars. On weekends when other men relaxed with beer or went hunting, I stacked bricks, shaped lumber, drove nails. I studied everything about plumbing, roofing, electrical work, because employing experts was beyond my budget. Every element of that home bears my effort. The walls, the floors, the ceiling. It was all my doing. When the home was finally complete, it wasn't flawless like the elegant houses in catalogs, but it was durable. It was cozy. It featured a broad veranda where a family could relax in the evenings. It had a robust basement, a solid roof, and sufficient rooms to nurture children. I took pride in it. I took pride because it wasn't merely a building. It was evidence that a man without wealth, without advantages, could still create something lasting with his bare hands and perseverance. I raised my son in that home. Every meal he consumed, every bed he rested in, every toy he enjoyed, all came under that roof I erected. He never experienced deprivation the way I did. He never felt the embarrassment of entering a schoolroom in ragged shoes because his father couldn't afford replacements. He had steadiness, comfort, and security because I strained myself to deliver it. I didn't grumble. I didn't remind him daily of my concessions. I simply provided because that's what fathers are meant to do. As the years went by, I labored harder to preserve that residence. I cleared the loan every cent. I improved elements as I could afford. When the roof dripped, I repaired it myself. When the heater failed, I took extra hours to replace it. When the paint flaked, I scraped and reapplied with my own hands. That home was never just timber and bricks to me. It was my life's achievement, my honor, my offering to the family I cherished, I assured myself. One day when I'm elderly and can't labor anymore, this home will support me. My son will allow me to reside here peacefully, enveloped by recollections, treated with dignity. I envisioned myself seated on the veranda, observing my grandchildren play in the yard, hearing joy instead of quiet. That was the image that guided me into retirement. When I finally retired, I desired little. I passed the home to my son Michael and his family. I told him, "This is your residence now. Nurture your children here. maintain the structure strong. I believed he would comprehend its significance. I believed he would honor the effort behind every brick. I believed he would value the gift. In my imagination, my later years would be filled with family gatherings, warmth, and appreciation. I assumed the residence I constructed with my hands would be the place where I was treasured, not abandoned. But dignity, I discovered, is not assured by concessions. You can erect a home for someone. You can erect their entire existence from the foundation. But if they don't esteem you as an individual, they will recognize none of it. My son relished the comfort. He relished the security. But gradually, I started to observe that he did not view me as the man who enabled it. He viewed me as an elderly man occupying space. Still, I clung to optimism. I thought family devotion would never falter. I thought the walls I erected were sturdy enough to sustain respect. I was mistaken. At first, life in the home with Michael's family was calm enough. I resolved to avoid interfering, to permit them to live as they wished, and I would find pleasure simply from being near them. I maintained my area tidy, prepared my own meals most days, and didn't meddle in how they raised the children. I thought I was being considerate, thought I was simplifying things for them. But bit by bit, I began to notice the way they regarded me, the sighs, the rolled eyes, the minor remarks that seemed innocuous initially, but wounded deeper over time. Michael began to complain about me more openly. He would say things like, "Dad, you're always here. We never get privacy." Or, "You move too slowly. You delay us." These weren't just offhand comments. They were infused with annoyance. I told myself not to take it to heart. I reminded myself that young families require space, and perhaps I truly was obstructing at times. But the words persisted, and each one eroded the vision I had held of us all coexisting harmoniously. My daughter-in-law Lisa was worse. She made no effort to conceal her contempt. She treated me like an unwelcome visitor in the residence I had constructed. She would forget to prepare enough supper for me, so I consumed whatever scraps I could locate. She rolled her eyes when I sat in the family room to view television, as if my mere existence was an interruption. She made remarks about how seniors have an odor and how this home feels too confined. I was never explicitly told to depart, but I was made to feel like an outsider in my own residence. The grandchildren observed and imitated. Children perceive more than adults realize. They saw their parents disregard me, ridicule me, shove me aside, and soon they started to copy that conduct. They stopped rushing into my arms as they did when younger. They chuckled when I struggled to rise from a chair. They teased me about my hearing, my wrinkles, my deliberate steps. I tolerated it all without protest because I didn't want to fracture the family. I told myself love requires patience. I told myself blood requires loyalty. But every day the fissures expanded. One evening I overheard Michael speaking to Lisa in the kitchen. He thought I had retired to bed, but I heard every syllable. "I can't endure it anymore," he said. "He's constantly present. He slows everything. He's aged and he's obstructing." Lisa agreed swiftly. "This isn't his residence anymore. He needs to grasp that." Those words pierced me deeper than any prior affront. Not his residence anymore. I was the one who laid the foundation, secured the beams, coated the walls. Every corner of that residence bore my imprints. And yet, to them, I was merely a hindrance. The small affronts evolved into overt antagonism. Michael began to treat me like a child he had to endure. He barked at me for leaving lights on. He grumbled that I squandered water when I took a prolonged shower. He accused me of disrupting the settings when I adjusted the thermostat. I wasn't a father anymore in his view. I was a load, an annoyance, an issue to be handled, and Lisa encouraged it, always murmuring, always smirking, always reminding him that I didn't fit. I endured because I trusted in family. I told myself, don't create conflict, don't retaliate, be thankful you're not isolated. I clung to the hope that perhaps deep inside Michael still cared for me. Perhaps he was just overwhelmed. Perhaps it was fleeting. But each day disproved me. Each affront, each rejection, each icy glance reminded me that dignity had departed this residence long ago. The worst aspect was the silence of others. No one protected me. No one told him he was mistaken. The children observed and replicated. Lisa smirked. Michael proceeded. And I sat there quietly, swallowing my pride, watching the cracks in the family's foundation spread wider and wider. I thought I had constructed a residence sturdy enough to endure eternally. But a residence is only as sturdy as the individuals within it, and within mine. Dignity was decaying like timber consumed from inside. I still clung to hope. But deep down I knew the reality. Sooner or later, those cracks would rupture into something I couldn't disregard. The tipping point arrived the summer they planned their getaway. Michael and Lisa had been discussing for weeks about departing for a 10-day trip with the children. They chuckled about shores, resorts, and how much they anticipated tranquility. I didn't dwell on it initially. I assumed I would merely remain in the residence while they were absent, as I had done numerous times before. I had no intention to disrupt anything. All I desired was to tend the plants, keep the residence orderly, and await their return. I had no cause to anticipate treachery. But on the morning they were departing, Michael pulled me aside. His tone was harsh, his eyes frigid. "Dad, just remain in place while we're gone," he said. "Don't wander around the residence. Don't touch anything." I was startled. I resided there. Why would I be treated like some undesired guest before I could reply? He added, "We'll return in 10 days. You'll manage." His words felt dismissive, but I nodded silently. I didn't want to dispute. When they were prepared to leave, Michael summoned me to the basement. "Just head down there for a bit," he said casually. I thought perhaps he needed me to assist with something, perhaps inspect the plumbing. I descended the old wooden steps, perplexed but trusting. The air was moist and the single bulb overhead flickered faintly. Before I could inquire what he required, I heard it, the sharp metallic snap of a lock behind me. My heart halted. I turned and saw the basement door sealed tight. The sound of the car engine followed. Tires rolled over gravel, and then quiet. I stood there immobilized, the truth striking me like a sledgehammer. He had confined me. My own son had confined me in the basement of the very residence I had constructed with my bare hands. I pressed against the door, twisted the knob, shouted his name, but nothing. The walls echoed my voice back to me, cold and indifferent. My body shook, not just from fear, but from incredulity. How could a son do this to his father? How could he treat me like an item to be stowed while he relished his getaway? The basement was dim except for the faint bulb. I searched for sustenance, for liquid, for anything. On a small table rested a full loaf of dry bread, a pitcher of faucet water, and a metal plate. That was it. That was what he provided me. Like I was some captive, some beast. My throat constricted as I realized he had orchestrated this. This wasn't an error. This wasn't oversight. He had deliberately left me confined, discarded in the basement so he and his family could exist freely above without the load of an elderly man. The initial hours were consumed by shock. I sat on the cold floor, gazing at the walls I once poured concrete into. Recollections of my younger self stacking those bricks surged back. And now here I was, ensnared within them. Every groan of the pipes taunted me. Every drop of water reminded me that I had become a captive in the place I thought was my haven. I consumed a small portion of bread, drank a little water, and waited, hoping perhaps he would return. Perhaps it was some distorted mistake. But deep down, I knew better. As the day shifted to night, fury began to supplant the shock. I reflected on all the concessions I had made, all the years I had devoted, all the hours of toil that built this place. And yet, to him, I was merely a nuisance to confine. My hands tightened into fists. The grief that had burdened me for years began to ignite into something keener, something icier. This wasn't just disrespect. This was disloyalty. I attempted to rest on the hard basement floor, but my mind wouldn't settle. I kept replaying every affront, every rejection, every time he made me feel insignificant. And now this was the peak of it all. Confined like I had no right to breathe the same air, no right to traverse the same floors. The basement that once housed my tools and supplies now contained me, the man who had erected everything above it. In those hours of seclusion, a realization hit me forcefully. My son no longer viewed me as his father. He viewed me as an obstacle. He viewed me as something to conceal, to restrain, to dominate. The affection I thought was indestructible had been worn away long ago, and now the truth was evident. To him, I was not family anymore. I was a problem to be resolved, and his resolution was to confine me like unwanted furnishings while he went on getaway. I sat in that basement for 3 days, the walls closing in, my stomach throbbing from hunger, my throat parched from rationing water. My body was frail, but my mind grew keener with every passing hour. If he thought confining me would force me to yield, he was mistaken. The basement didn't shatter me. It tempered me. Every affront, every laugh at my expense, every cold glance, and now this disloyalty. All of it fueled a single blaze inside me. By the time I heard the lock release and the door creak open, I wasn't the same man who had descended those stairs. I was no longer just a humiliated father. I was something else, something icier, something resolute. And in that instant, I knew one thing for sure. My son would regret ever treating me like a captive in the residence I built. Those 3 days in the basement were the longest of my life. Time progressed differently down there. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. The walls pressed around me, cold and damp, and every sound seemed to resonate louder than it should. I had been left with a full loaf of dry bread, a pitcher of faucet water, and nothing else. The bread was tough, arid, almost flavorless, but I compelled myself to chew it gradually, portioning it so I wouldn't exhaust it too soon. The water tasted metallic, like corrosion from old pipes, but I sipped it in small quantities, cautious not to squander a single drop. I sat on the concrete floor, the chill infiltrating my bones. My back ached, my knees pulsed, and my hands quivered when I pressed them against the walls. I stared at the faint fractures in the cement, fractures I remembered sealing with mortar years ago. I built those walls. I poured the foundation. I made the basement sturdy so the family above would be secure. And now I was the one ensnared within it. treated like a captive in the very space I created. The humiliation was intolerable. Each time I looked at that loaf of bread, I thought of animals treated with more respect. Each sip of water reminded me of the innumerable nights I worked extra to pay for this residence, only to now be concealed beneath it, like I was worth less than the soil under the foundation. I recalled the words of my son, "Remain in place," and I realized that's all I was to him now, a thing to store away, something to be concealed from view so it wouldn't disrupt his life. The worst part wasn't the hunger, it wasn't the thirst, it was the quiet. Above me, I could envision the residence vacant, their laughter already distant on their getaway. I sat there alone, overlooked, discarded like some outdated piece of furniture. The quiet made me feel unseen. It made me feel like I had already passed, and the world simply continued without noticing. I thought of all the years I had conceded, all the overtime hours I worked, all the sweat I poured into constructing that residence, and I asked myself, is this what it was all for? At first, I felt profound grief, my chest hurt, my eyes stung, and I wanted to weep. But no tears emerged. The grief solidified into something else, something colder. Fury began to develop inside me, gradual at first, then consistent, then scorching like flame. Every passing hour, the humiliation transformed into rage. Rage at my son for betraying me. Rage at myself for allowing him to treat me this way for so long. Rage at the notion that I had given him everything only to be confined like a wrongdoer. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they ached. The fury provided me strength where the bread and water could not. My body might have been weak, but my mind honed with each moment. I realized something crucial down there in the gloom. Grief accomplishes nothing, but fury shifts mountains. Fury fuels determination. Fury gives rise to deed. And I knew then that when I left that basement, I would never return to being the silent, patient father who tolerated everything quietly. By the third night, I had ceased eating. The bread was there, but I didn't care anymore. My hunger was no longer for sustenance. It was for fairness. I wanted him to experience what I felt. I wanted him to comprehend what it meant to be powerless, to sit in shadows with no authority, to depend on someone who no longer valued you. I wanted him to feel humiliation. But more than that, I wanted him to forfeit everything he had assumed was guaranteed. When I lay on the concrete floor that night, gazing at the flickering bulb, I made a pledge to myself, a pledge that I would not let this betrayal go unanswered, a pledge that I would demonstrate to my son what occurs when you treat the man who constructed your future like nothing. I whispered into the quiet, "You will pay for this." The basement had attempted to shatter me, but instead it forged me into something stronger, something keener, something perilous. By the time I finally heard the lock turn and the basement door creak open, I was no longer the same man who descended those stairs. The hunger, the thirst, the humiliation, they had burned away the frailty in me. What emerged from that basement wasn't just a father. It was a man with nothing left to forfeit, a man prepared to reclaim his dignity in the only manner his son would comprehend. Not with words, not with sermons, but with merciless action. When the basement door finally opened and I ascended, my body was frail, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping water, allowing the sunlight to warm my face. They were away on their getaway. laughing somewhere under palm trees while I sat in the silence of the residence I built. And it was in that silence that the truth resurfaced, a truth I had nearly overlooked. The residence was mine, legally, fully, completely mine. For all the years I had resided with them, I had convinced myself that the residence belonged to the family. I told myself I had bestowed it to Michael, that this was his home now, his roof, his existence. But the documents told a different tale. I had never transferred it. I had never assigned the title. Every tax notice still arrived in my name. Every legal record still listed me as the proprietor. In the eyes of the law, this was not Michael's residence. It was mine. The notion struck me like a thunderbolt. While I was in the basement, humiliated and treated like refuse, I realized I had retained authority all along. Michael thought he could confine me, mute me, erase me. But he had overlooked the one fact that mattered. The walls around him, the roof above him, the ground beneath him, all of it was mine. I didn't just construct it with my hands. I possessed it on record, and that truth altered everything. I reflected on the years I worked extra shifts to acquire this land. I reflected on how I transported bricks, how I shaped wood, how I installed the wiring. I reflected on how I signed the initial loan document with shaking hands, uncertain if I could meet the payments. I reflected on how I paid every invoice promptly, never missing one, ensuring the residence was always secure. Michael had resided here all his life, but he never compensated for it. He never strained for it. He never conceded a single thing to make it endure. It wasn't his residence. It never had been. That truth empowered me. I no longer saw myself as the elderly man confined in the basement. I saw myself as the rightful proprietor who had been treated like an intruder in his own home. Michael had overlooked the law, but I hadn't. Michael had overlooked who constructed this place, but I remembered. He thought he could confine me and relish the luxury I supplied, but he was existing on borrowed time. I went to the drawer where I stored vital papers. My fingers trembled slightly as I extracted the folder with the title, the tax records, the invoices in my name. I spread them on the table one by one, examining them as if they were armaments. And in a way, they were. These papers were sturdier than any lock he could place on that basement door. These papers were keener than his affronts, louder than his laughter. They were evidence that the residence was mine to handle as I desired. For a moment, I almost chuckled. All those times he told me I was obstructing. All those times he treated me like a visitor. All those times he forgot that every wall was built with my hands. He didn't even realize he was standing on ground that could disappear from under him with a single signature. That was the overlooked truth. As I surveyed the residence, memories enveloped me. I saw the dent in the wall where Michael kicked a baseball when he was 8. I saw the scratch on the stair rail from when I carried furniture up alone. I saw the kitchen table worn from years of meals. Every corner carried history. But history doesn't erase possession. The more I observed, the clearer it became. If he could confine me in the basement without hesitation, he didn't merit residing here. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "This is still my residence." Uttering it aloud made it tangible. The fury in my chest solidified into determination. I realized I didn't need to debate with him. I didn't need to demand dignity with words. I could reclaim everything he assumed was his. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. The humiliation of the basement had incinerated my patience. The grief had turned to flame, and now, armed with the truth of possession, I knew precisely what I was going to do. I wasn't just going to reclaim my dignity. I was going to reclaim my residence. And when Michael returned from his getaway, he would discover the truth the harshest way possible. The instant I realized the residence was still mine, I knew I couldn't delay. Michael thought he had muted me by confining me. But I would respond with my own silence. Silence filled with deed. I didn't shout. I didn't compose a letter. I didn't even await his return. I simply reached for the phone. My hands, still rough from decades of work, dialed a number I hadn't used in years. My old acquaintance, a real estate agent I had known since the days when I first acquired the land. When he answered, his voice was steady, professional. "Hello, it's me," I said, my voice calm, keener than it had been in a long time. "I want to sell my residence right away." There was a pause on the line. "Are you certain?" he inquired. "That residence is your legacy. You constructed it." I closed my eyes briefly, recalling the basement, the dry bread, the sound of the lock snapping behind me. My jaw tightened. "I've never been more certain," I responded. "Locate buyers for me. I want cash, and I want it quickly." He didn't debate further. He knew me well enough to detect the resolve in my voice. "Very well," he said. "I know individuals who will be interested. Investors. They pay swiftly. If your records are in order, we can proceed rapidly." "My records are in order," I informed him resolutely. "I never assigned anything away." The call concluded, and I felt a peculiar calm envelop me. For the first time in years, I wasn't depending on anyone else. I wasn't pleading for dignity. I wasn't holding on to a son who viewed me as nothing. I was assuming control quietly, efficiently. That same afternoon, the real estate agent arrived at the residence. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Michael once ridiculed me for being slow, and spread the papers across its surface. The title, the tax documents, my identification. Everything was pristine, irrefutable, solid. He nodded as he examined them. "This residence is yours." "No doubt," he said. "Legally, your son has no claims here. If you want to sell, nothing can halt you." Those words filled me with contentment. For years, I had been treated like a load under this roof, but on record, I was still the master of it. Michael had overlooked that, but the law hadn't. The real estate agent made a few calls right there. I sat in silence, sipping my tea, listening as he conversed with potential buyers. Within hours, inspections were scheduled. Investors desired to view the property, and they didn't mind that the current family was away on getaway. Money speaks louder than anything else. Over the next few days, I guided strangers through the home. I displayed the structure, the yard, the basement where I had been confined. I didn't share that detail, of course, but I touched the walls as I passed, knowing soon they would no longer belong to Michael. Each step I took with those buyers felt like reclaiming something. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a victim. I was a man converting humiliation into retribution with every signature and handshake. One evening after this final inspection, I sat alone in the family room. I gazed at the pictures on the wall, family portraits, smiling faces, all feigning to be what we weren't. I didn't feel grief anymore. I didn't feel remorse. I felt determination. I whispered to myself, "He confined me in the basement. I will confine him out of everything." The real estate agent returned the following day with an offer. Full cash. No stipulations. Closing in under 10 days. It was more money than I ever envisioned possessing in my lifetime. I didn't waver. I nodded. Accept it, I said. Finalize it. We shook hands, and I felt the blaze inside me cool into something steady. This was not rage anymore. This was fairness. Michael thought he had interred me in the dark, but he had only granted me the clarity to act. Now, with a single phone call, I had initiated the end of his arrogance. As the paperwork progressed, I thought about the moment they would return from their getaway. They would drive into the driveway, smiling, relaxed, tanned from the sun. They would unlock the front door, expecting their existence to be precisely as they left it. But instead, they would encounter strangers inside, their furnishings removed, their home no longer theirs. They would scream, they would panic, they would contact me, but it would be too late. The residence would no longer belong to them. The residence would no longer belong to me. It would belong to someone else entirely. And when Michael asked, "How could you do this?" my reply would be straightforward. The same way you could confine me in the basement. The transaction advanced faster than I anticipated. Once the real estate agent confirmed the buyer, everything unfolded with accuracy. Documents were prepared, agreements printed, signatures arranged. I observed it all from my chair at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once felt invisible. And now it was the hub of my authority. Each document that appeared before me felt like a nail sealing Michael's fate. I didn't hesitate. I didn't reconsider. I signed each page with a firm hand, every stroke of ink stronger than the snap of the lock he once turned on me in the basement. Within 10 days, the deal was concluded. The property I had invested decades of effort into was no longer in Michael's grasp. Not that it ever truly was. The new buyers deposited the full amount into my account, a vast sum larger than anything I had ever witnessed in my life. The figures shone on the bank statement like evidence of my retribution. For years, I had existed modestly, consuming simple meals, wearing tattered clothes, thinking my role was only to supply for others. Now, for the first time, I held the full fruit of my labor in my own hands. The attorney managing the sale affirmed everything clearly. "Your son has no legal entitlement," he informed me resolutely. "The residence was always yours, and you had every right to sell. There's nothing he can do." Hearing that made the triumph even more satisfying. For years, I had been labeled weak, useless, obsolete. Yet, here I was, supported by law, supported by funds, supported by fairness. Michael thought he had authority because he held the key to a lock, but I had held the title, and the title is what truly counted. I walked through the residence one final time after signing the concluding papers. The rooms were silent, devoid of warmth. The walls carried memories, laughter from when Michael was young, echoes of family suppers, footsteps of children dashing. But those memories felt remote now, almost alien. This residence was no longer a home. It had become a site of betrayal, of humiliation, of anguish. Selling it didn't shatter me. It liberated me. I touched the doorway gently, not with grief, but with closure. "You're not my cage anymore," I whispered. The buyers acted swiftly. Within days, movers arrived. Furnishings were transported out. Boxes piled. Rooms cleared. I packed only a single suitcase for myself. The remainder I abandoned. I didn't care what occurred to the dining chairs or the old couch. I didn't care about the family pictures still mounted on the wall. Let Michael return to find them vanished. Let him see strangers dining in his kitchen, strangers resting in his bedroom, strangers traversing his floors. That would be my message to him, stronger than any words. The day the sale was stamped and filed, I stood outside the residence, regarding it from the yard. The windows reflected the sky, calm and ordinary, as if nothing had altered. But everything had altered. That residence no longer belonged to him. It no longer belonged to me. It belonged to people who viewed it as an asset, not a prison. And I was relieved because the residence that once embodied pride had become a symbol of disrespect. Selling it was not just retribution, it was purification. When I accessed my bank account and saw the funds there, a lifetime of concessions suddenly felt validated. Michael could no longer ridicule me, could no longer confine me, could no longer exist off my efforts. The bond had been severed, and I was the one who severed it. I didn't celebrate with wine. I didn't shout. I simply sat in silence, allowing the reality to absorb. Michael's arrogance had been eradicated with a few strokes of my pen. His dominance over me was eliminated. The elegance of it all was its simplicity. He had attempted to reduce me to nothing with a lock and a basement. I reduced him to nothing with documents and signatures. My retribution was quiet, legal, pristine. There would be no battles in court, no debates to win, no gaps to exploit. It was accomplished. Irreversible, permanent. My humiliation had been cleansed with ink. I thought about his expression when he would return from getaway. He would exit the car, carry his bags to the front veranda, insert the key into the lock, and nothing would occur. The lock wouldn't yield. The residence wouldn't open. Strangers would greet him. Not his father. He would survey in disbelief, confusion shifting to terror. And then he would grasp the truth. While he was on the shore sipping beverages, the ground beneath him had been sold. His getaway would conclude in devastation. As I sat with the signed title in my hand, one thought lingered in my mind. He thought I was powerless, but he overlooked who constructed this residence. He overlooked whose name was on the papers. He overlooked who I am. And now he would never overlook again. Once the sale was conclusive and the funds securely in my account, I knew it was time to depart. There was no reason to linger a day longer in the place that had become my confinement. The movers had already emptied most of the residence for the new owners. Boxes stacked against the walls reminded me that my tenure here was finished. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel apprehension. I felt liberation. For decades, this residence had been my pride. Then it became my prison. Now it was neither. It was just property, and it no longer belonged to Michael. That thought granted me tranquility. I packed lightly. Just one suitcase, a few garments, some personal records, and small mementos that mattered only to me. I didn't take furnishings, didn't take utensils, didn't take anything that bound me to the years of humiliation I had tolerated. Let Michael return and discover nothing of mine remaining. Let the walls resonate with emptiness when he searched for me. I wanted the residence to convey for me in silence. No note, no clarification, just absence. The emptiness itself would be my concluding message to him. On my final morning there, I stood in the basement once more. The same basement where he had confined me like a beast. I ran my hand along the cold cement wall. The memories were vivid. The dry bread, the metallic water, the sound of the lock. For a moment, the fury flared inside me again. But then I smiled. This basement no longer held authority over me. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was just a room in someone else's residence. And that change, knowing it wasn't mine or his anymore, was the greatest solace of all. I ascended, extinguished the lights, and secured the front door behind me. It was the last time I would ever possess that key. I didn't retain it. I placed it on the kitchen counter before departing, allowing the new owners to decide its fate. The key wasn't mine anymore, and I didn't desire it. The residents had already extracted too much from me, and I had delivered my response by selling it. Walking down the street with my suitcase in hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't an elderly man being concealed. I wasn't a load to anyone. I was free. The bus stop wasn't distant, and as I sat on the bench waiting, I thought about Michael. At that very instant, he was probably reclining under the sun on a shore, drinking and chuckling, thinking his father was confined in the basement, awaiting his return. He thought he had triumphed. He thought he had placed me in my position. But when he returned, he would find himself confined out of everything he assumed was his. The basement that once contained me would contain only strangers' furnishings. The kitchen that once ignored me would nourish a new family. The family room where he ridiculed me would resonate with different voices, and he would realize he had forfeited everything while I had departed quietly. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't leave a contact number. I didn't inform anyone of my destination. They didn't merit knowing. My departure wasn't just from the residence. It was from the shackles of disrespect that had bound me for years. Michael had compelled me into silence, but now my silence was my armament. He would return to discover no father, no residence, no clarification, only absence. The bus arrived and I boarded, settling by the window. As the bus departed, I glanced back at the residence one final time. The veranda, the windows, the roof, it all receded into the distance. And with every mile, I felt my fury subside. My retribution was already accomplished. My departure wasn't an escape. It was a triumph procession. The consequences unfolded exactly as I envisioned. Michael and his family returned from their getaway 10 days later, bags in hand, sunburned, chuckling, expecting to re-enter the same existence they had abandoned. Their vehicle entered the driveway, but the initial shock came when they saw other vehicles already stationed there. The front yard, once theirs, was now cluttered with boxes being transported by strangers. Movers entered and exited freely, unloading furnishings for the new owners. Michael stood frozen, his smile vanishing. Lisa's jaw dropped. The children appeared perplexed. Nothing was as they anticipated. He charged up to the front veranda, his key in hand, prepared to unlock the door. But when he inserted it into the lock, it didn't turn. He attempted again, more forcefully this time, twisting, compelling, as if pure anger would make the door comply. But the residence no longer belonged to him. The lock had been altered. The key that once granted him authority was now valueless. He pounded on the door, demanding entry, his voice escalating in alarm. And then the new owner emerged, composed, collected, holding the title. "This is my residence now," the man informed him flatly. "You need to vacate the property." Michael's face flushed with incredulity. "What are you discussing? This is my home. My family resides here." His voice faltered as neighbors glanced from their windows, observing the spectacle unfold. But the truth was irrefutable. The strangers inside, the moving vehicles outside, the new locks on the doors, all of it proclaimed what he didn't want to accept. The residence was gone. He seized his phone and contacted me immediately. His voice trembled with rage when I responded. "Dad, what did you do? Where are you? The residence. It's vanished. You can't do this to me." His words gushed out in alarm, a blend of anger and dread. But I didn't shout back. I didn't clarify. I simply said, "The residence was never yours. It was mine. And now it isn't anymore." Then I disconnected. He left message after message, his anger intensifying each time. He labeled me a betrayer, a robber, a harsh elderly man. He pleaded. He menaced. He wept. But I never responded again. Every message was evidence that he finally comprehended what it meant to lose authority. He had once confined me in silence, and now I returned the silence to him. It was the only response he merited. Lisa attempted contacting too, her tone keener, filled with fury. She screamed into the phone about how I had devastated their lives, how the children would endure, how they had no place to go. But I recalled how she regarded me like filth, how she rolled her eyes when I entered the room, how she treated me as if I were invisible in my own residence. Their suffering didn't affect me. They had sown the seeds of cruelty for years, and now they were harvesting the results. The neighbors murmured about it for weeks. Some said I overstepped. Others quietly respected what I had done. People adore rumors. But none of them truly grasped what it felt like to be confined in a basement by your own son, treated as less than human. Only I knew that anguish. Only I knew the blaze it had ignited in me. Selling the residence wasn't just retribution. It was endurance. It was reclaiming dignity. Michael attempted to contest legally, but the law was explicit. The title had always been in my name. The sale was valid. His attorney informed him bluntly there was nothing to be done. Every avenue he pursued closed firmly in his face. For the first time, he felt powerless. For the first time, he knew what I had felt in that basement. Trapped, humiliated, vanquished. I heard later that they were compelled to lease a small condo. No yard, no veranda, no expansive rooms, just cramped walls and the constant reminder of what they had forfeited. My grandson, who once chuckled at me for being slow, now shared a room with his sister because space was limited. Lisa, who once sneered at me for being in the way, now grumbled about residing in someone else's structure. And Michael, the man who once confined me below the residence I built, now paid rent to a stranger every month. The irony was flawless. I didn't gloat openly. I didn't ascend a rooftop and proclaim my triumph. My retribution was quiet, invisible, but it resided in their every discomfort, their every remorse, their every moment of realizing they had destroyed the one man who had given them everything. The consequences weren't just about their decline. It was about my liberation. I no longer existed under their dominance. I no longer tolerated their affronts. I no longer felt like a captive in the residence I built. I had funds in the bank, options in my grasp, and dignity in my spirit. For the first time in years, I was truly liberated. Fairness didn't arrive in the form of shouting or courts or through pleading apologies. Fairness arrived the day I departed that residence with my suitcase and never glanced back. For decades, I thought my purpose was to provide for Michael, to keep giving even when I had nothing remaining for myself. I thought dignity would be the natural recompense for concessions. But I learned the truth in the darkest place, the basement. Dignity isn't returned just because you merited it. If people forfeit dignity for you, you must seize it back yourself. And that is what I did. The funds from the sale granted me a new existence. I didn't squander it on extravagances. I used it to acquire a modest condo by the ocean. It wasn't lavish, but it was mine. No one could confine me there. No one could tell me I was obstructing. I awoke every morning to the sound of waves and the scent of salt in the air. I sat on the balcony with my coffee, observing the sunrise, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Genuine peace. Not silence imposed on me, but silence I selected. For the first time in a long time, I began expending money on myself. I purchased comfortable attire. I replaced my old worn chair with one that didn't harm my back. I visited eateries when I desired, ordered the cuisine I craved and savored it without remorse. Every bite tasted like liberation. Every dollar I expended reminded me that I had reclaimed control of my existence. Meanwhile, Michael struggled. I didn't need to witness it to know it. I knew his pride wouldn't survive forfeiting that residence. I knew the walls of that condo he leased would enclose him. I knew every rent payment would remind him of what he forfeited and who extracted it from him. The man who confined me in a basement would exist the remainder of his life knowing that I had confined him out of his future. That was my fairness. I didn't care if the world critiqued me for it. People can say I was severe, merciless, even vicious, but they weren't the ones confined in a basement, treated like refuse in their own residence. They didn't hear the snap of the lock. They didn't consume dry bread in the gloom. They didn't feel the humiliation of being concealed by the very child they conceded everything for. I endured it, and only I know how burdensome that load was. Now when I stroll along the shore and observe the waves crash, I reflect on that basement. I reflect on that lock. And I smile because I converted that humiliation into authority. Michael thought he had shattered me, but in the end I shattered him without raising a hand. No shouting, no battling, just one phone call, one signature, one sale. My only concluding reflection is he confined me in the basement. I confined him out of the future.